interest. I am serious about barbecue. I'm happy to talk to you about it, but no amateurs. Welcome, y'all. I'm glad you're here. I'm supposed to talk to you about something meaningful or inspiring, so I thought I'd talk about trucks. I was born in North Carolina, the son of a truck driver. My grandfather and his brothers owned a trucking company called Northeastern Freight Lines. Growing up, my life revolved around trucks. When Daddy was leaving, when he would be home. I took my first trip on a truck when I was 5 years old, traveling from Charlotte, North Carolina to Raleigh, North Carolina with Mike Green, one of my granddaddy's drivers. I came home from that trip and told my mom, "I'm a real truck driver. I peed on a tire." I kept taking trips on school breaks and during summers until I was in my late 20s. I missed those trips, seeing the produce fields outside Palatka, Florida, the submarines leaving the Norfolk Naval Station, the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the industrial parks of Peoria, Illinois, and miles and miles and miles of land in between. As you can guess, Daddy and I spent a lot of time together in the cab of a truck. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just rode, looking out the windshield, the mile markers whipping by. One thing I noticed on these trips was the way Daddy always pointed out things he saw, like foxes or deer or red-tailed hawks. I always thought that driving a truck, driving anything really, meant you kept your eyes on the road. But Daddy seemed to spend as much time looking beyond the white lines marking the edge of the highways and interstates as he did looking at them. I also learned that he looked further down the road than I did when I was driving my car. I asked him about it one trip. "Daddy, why are you always looking around so much?" He gave me a couple of reasons. I like to see what's out there. And I always look way ahead so I can stay out of trouble. Things happen fast when you're going 70 miles per hour and weigh 80,000 pounds. I can't stop, so I've got to find some place to go. I didn't realize it at the time, but Daddy's truck driving taught me some lessons. Lessons that relate to what I did in 1985, which is start my first year of college at Appalachian State University, and to what you're doing today by starting your own college education. What? You might be thinking, dude drove a truck. I'm going to college so I don't have to drive a truck. My dad always told me he'd kick my ass if I drove a truck. So how does this work? I'm going to tell you. Lesson 1. You need to stay on the route and on the road. Daddy carried freight from point A to point B, and he had to get it there. Sometimes the freight was fragile, like strawberries. Sometimes not, like steel reinforcing wire. No matter what, though, he had a deadline and a destination. Sometimes he hit detours. Sometimes his truck broke. Sometimes the weather turned to shit. Whatever the conditions, though, he delivered his freight. He always knew where he was going, and he figured out what he needed to do when he had problems, whether it was find another route or call for help. When I started college, I had a vague idea of what I wanted to do, which was not a bad thing. But I recognize now that if I'd been a little more focused on my destination, I would have been a better student. The point is to know your route, know where you're going, realize when things are going to shit and call for help. Talk to your professors or counselor, find a tutor or resident assistant. Do it early. You've got a delivery to make. Lesson 2, look beyond the white lines. Because I learned early on from Daddy to look around while I'm driving somewhere, I see and learn so much more. We live in a damn interesting world. Sure, I have a destination, a place I need to get to, but only staring toward or paying attention to point B is, I found, a form of blindness. I will get there, but I won't know nearly as much, won't be nearly as interesting, won't connect with people and places nearly as well if I don't spend some time paying attention to what's around me. I've seen Daddy talk with a forklift operator in Peoria about the bald eagle we saw on I-75, and they shared a moment of connection. Same thing with my degree. I took my classes, followed the route laid out for me, but I made sure to look beyond the lines of my major, to learn a little from the other disciplines, to make connections. I learned more, especially from disciplines like geosciences, psychology, education, and biology. And now, though I'm not an expert in those, I've got more to offer. Lesson 3, Daddy drove the truck. The truck didn't drive him. In other words, he controlled the truck. He had to look around, constantly see his options, like where to get fuel and food or to dodge construction or accidents, and he adjusted accordingly. Like I said in lesson 1, I would have been a better student if I had a better idea of what my route was. Instead, I let my education drive me. As a result, I missed a lot. Take charge of your education like Daddy took charge of his truck. Learn to look at your program evaluation on WebAdvisor. Meet with your instructors. If you're not happy with your program, change it. Make the general education program work for you. If you've got questions, ask them. Advocate for yourself. Ask for help. It doesn't mean that you can't look around, learn about things other than your major, or have fun, but it does mean you'll have more control in where you're going. Lesson 4. Daddy spent a lot of time on the road, but he could never completely leave home. In the story I shared with you at the beginning, I gave you 2 pieces of information about me I can never change. I'm a Southerner and a truck driver's son. I have 4 degrees, including a PhD, but I can never change where I was born and who I was born to. My point is that Daddy always carried home, the good parts and the bad parts, around with him wherever he went. He changed a lot on the road, learned to love different foods, saw millions of miles of roads running through different landscapes, visited Canada and Mexico, but he never forgot where he came from. In my trip through higher education, I've changed a lot over time, and I've got to tell you, higher ed is not always a kind place for a Southerner. People sometimes see us as stupid or racist or backwards, like a good friend who once told me, "When I first met you, I thought you were just another Southern dumbass." Parts of the Southern stereotype are true, and I've had to learn to live with it, like the South's racism. For a long time, I was ashamed of being a Southerner, especially in the university, because I knew how many viewed the South. But I also knew that accusations of racism, while accurate, did not represent all the attitudes or the people of the South. Because of the experiences I've had studying in the university and my lived experiences in the South and outside it, I see race and racism more complexly everywhere I go, and it's a problem everywhere. Even though the South is a flawed place, I love it, and I've recognized that I have a complicated relationship with it. Because I've traveled so much and learned so much, looked outside the white line, so to speak, I've come to understand how Southerners and other people see the South, and what I need to do to help all of them see the bad and the good. Learning more about my home and recognizing I can never fully leave it behind helps me figure out ways to make my home a better place. Like my daddy traveling through different cultures and landscapes, you may find that your relationship with your home becomes more complicated as you take more classes, meet people from other places, encounter ideas and values different from yours. It's worth hearing what people are saying, whether in class or out, and know that it's not the whole story, that the story is more complicated, and that you can never escape it. I suggest embracing those complications. Nowhere is perfect, and you're going to learn a lot about your place you probably didn't expect. As you're traveling literally and metaphorically along different routes through different disciplines, no matter what, you'll always carry a little home with you, which is good. Whether you like it or not, it's part of who you are. Lesson 5. Looking outside the lines keeps the traveling fresh. I've always wondered how Daddy kept from being bored doing the same thing day in and day out. Part of it was that he loved driving a truck. Part of it was that he saw the same roads differently. He might have driven I-40 or I-81 hundreds of times, but he saw different things every time, which kept his job interesting and fresh, and kept him alert and safe. Lesson 6. Sleep when you're tired. When Daddy got tired, he found a place to stop and he grabbed some sleep. A tired driver is a dangerous driver. Daddy drove around 4 million miles without causing an accident because he stopped when he got tired. You won't run off the road if you go to sleep writing a paper for Comp 1, but you also won't be doing your best work. Get some sleep. Embrace the changes. This is lesson 7. Embrace the changes. This relates to lesson 4. When Daddy started driving, there were no interstates. Trucks did not have air conditioning, and there wasn't much traffic. Now, some trucks are nicer than my house. Many have GPS units that track hours driven at what speed along what routes, and the AC units are cold enough for meat lockers. He enjoyed the old days, and he enjoyed the later years as well, especially since they were safer. Your discipline has probably changed in the past few years, and it will continue to do so, as will practically everything else in our lives. Acknowledge those changes, think about how they make your life better or worse, and figure out how you can make them work for you. Speaking of things changing, the main vehicle in my life is no longer a 400 horsepower diesel truck, but the bicycle. I drive a bicycle a lot, around 3,000 miles a year. You could say I'm following in Daddy's tracks. I travel the same routes over and over. I leave home and return. I see how the land around me changes. I run into problems on my route. I think about fuel, usually in the form of burgers and beer. And sometimes I get tired and have to stop. However, unlike the trips I took with Daddy where I was a passenger, I'm always driving my bike. Sometimes I'm riding for pleasure, sometimes I'm training for races. But since I'm not a passenger, I've learned a couple things to add to the lessons Daddy's truck driving taught me. Lesson 8. Frequent practice makes you stronger and more efficient. I try to ride my bike at least 4 days a week, from 1 to 4 hours. It works out roughly to 10 to 15 hours a week. When I first started riding, I couldn't do very much, but now I've gotten stronger and more efficient on the bike. I can ride more because it's easier, which means I can ride faster, which means I can ride farther, and so on. I'm not a beginner anymore. Same thing with my studies. At first, little of it made sense, but I stuck with it, learned more, became more efficient, and so on. Put another way, majoring in a discipline is like training for a bike race. You've got to put in the time, and weirdly, it'll get easier and harder at the same time. So treat your brain like a muscle. Lesson 9. You can always turn the pedals over one more time. I know I've mentioned the importance of sleep, or rest more generally, and I fully believe it. I also know that sometimes I'm gassed, but I've got to keep going. Cycling has taught me to do that, to chase down a fellow cyclist, to climb one more hills, to push the pedals over one more time. You'll know what I mean at the end of the semester. And yes, I know, conflicting messages, but that's college for you. Lesson 10, break big tasks into little chunks. If I'm climbing a huge hill like Fire Tower Road on my bike, I don't think about the whole thing at once. Instead of imagining pedaling 2 miles while gaining 1,000 feet, I ride to that pine tree up ahead, then to the first gate, then to the flat spot past the curve, then to the false flat, and so on. College works the same way, so does life. Lesson 11, do something else. I'm relating riding my bike to going to college, but I ride my bike in part to get away from college. Y'all are awesome, but if all I did was study or teach, I would go insane. So I ride my bike. When I get buzzed by a rattlesnake or outsprint a friend or climb a difficult hill, it pulls me outside the lines of the academic world I live in. You don't have to ride a bike, though I'd highly recommend it, but find something you can do that takes you away from school for a while, preferably something fun and physical. When I read back through this paper, which I've done multiple times, I notice that what I'm talking about is how we handle being in motion. We can keep our heads down and keep moving forward to deliver our freight or get our degree, and there's something to be said for that. But I think the final thing I take away from Daddy's life on the road, looking beyond the white lines, is that he was more than a truck driver. Like I'm more than a Southerner or a college professor. Like you are more than the lines drawn around your disciplines or your identity. As you travel through the next 4 years, following your route or even changing it, be sure to keep looking outside the lines. Stay on your route and don't let the lines others draw around you define you. Thank you.